Hi, everybody. I know most of you are used to seeing Stacy Cochran sitting up here, but I'm taking his place tonight as moderator and running the group. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Tonight, we are very honored to have my friend, Jaye here. And she has written her debut novel, Redheaded Stepchild. I say debut, this is the first that has been published.
Well, it's my debut novel, right. Not the first I wrote.
Not the first she's written, so some of you can relate to that. Jaye was raised in Texas, but then she spent a few years here in North Carolina.
About 4.5, yeah.
So she had a winding career path, if you read her intro for the group, which had her working for a motivational speaker at one point, and then working at the North Carolina Museum of Art, just down the road for a short time. And then at a regional magazine.
Newcomer magazine, which was around forever, and I wrote for Relo Guide and Wake Living, and sorry, I'm giving my own bio.
That's okay. See, and some of you might be able to relate to some of that as well. So she knew she loved to write, but she wasn't so sure she loved to write facts. And so she put her overactive imagination to use and now writes fiction. And the world of urban fantasy is all the better for that, I think. Yeah. No, it is. I'll confess that that's not my usual genre, but I read Jaye's book and I really enjoyed it a lot because she's a great writer. No. But you can pay me later.
She has to say that because we're friends.
No, I don't have to say that, but I mean it. So anyway, she has some North Carolina ties, and I'm happy to have her here, and I'm glad she made it. And so we're going to talk to her tonight about the process of getting published, and the process of getting an agent, and the process of going through the production of your first novel, and hopefully some of you at some point will be in the same situation, and we'll be happy to see that. So this is your first published novel, as you said. Tell us a little bit about it. Some people might not be familiar with the genre, and don't really, tell us the storyline, but tell us about what kind of book it is, and maybe a little bit about the main character.
Okay, well, I guess to start out, the first question I have to ask you one is, who here knows what urban fantasy is? Well, there's a couple of urban fantasy authors in the back. Urban fantasy is a genre that is a melting pot of other genres. Generally, the main characters are paranormal in nature. My protagonist is half vampire and half mage. There's also demons and fairies and all sorts of things that go bump in the night. But most urban fantasies have some kind of paranormal element at the center. But they also draw elements from mystery, romance, humor, action, thrillers. Pretty much any genre out there we steal without any shame. And so we kind of combine all of the elements of those genres and create a whole new kind of story. To put it in terms of movies you might have seen, I would consider Underworld urban fantasy. I would consider, I just completely blanked. Jenna, help me.
Buffy the Vampire
Slayer. Buffy. Yeah, Buffy is what a lot of people credit the rise of the genre for. There's a lot of influences that led to it. But if you've ever seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer and kind of are familiar with that, that's urban fantasy. It's our world with paranormal elements that actually exist in our world. And generally there's some kind of saving the world element to it or other big plot device like that. My book specifically is about an assassin named Sabina Kane. As I said, she's half vampire and half mage. She was raised as a vampire, but doesn't really fit into that world because vampires are very kind of classist, and mating between the races is forbidden. So she's this, result of this forbidden love affair between a mage and a vampire. It's very scandalous, so she doesn't really fit in. But she's kind of found her niche as an assassin, which also further kind of puts her on the edge of society. People don't really hang out with assassins. Yeah. Good move. The book is about, she is sent on a mission to infiltrate a rival cult and assassinate the leader. But this mission, as she gets further into it, reveals a lot of secrets about her own past, about some activities that her bosses, they're called the Dominae. It's 3 ancient female vampires who rule the race. Some things that they're into that is not good stuff because it could lead to war. And so the book is really about her trying to figure out, is she on the right side? Whose side should she be on? And how does it affect her life? So that's kind of the basis of the story.
Yeah. So as she said, it pulls from a lot of different genres, and that's one reason I found myself enjoying it maybe even more than I thought I would, because you can relate to it. You know, sometimes you see demons and mazes and fairies, and you're like, yeah, okay. I mean, you know, some people won't read that because of that, but give it a try. That's good.
Well, and what's been really gratifying to me is I read urban fantasy. I'm a fan of it, and I know a lot of people who are. But what's great is to hear from people who've read it who would never ever read a vampire book ever because they're like, I didn't read that. But they have to read it because they know me. And then they're like, wait, I actually liked it. And I'm like, yeah, because a good story is a good story. Whether you have a vampire protagonist, whether you have a Mississippi farmer protagonist, whether you have, a lawyer, a good story well told is, and I like to think it's well told in my case. But you know, some people in urban fantasy relate to the mystery elements, and some prefer the romance aspect. So there's really kind of something there for everybody. You can kind of focus on the storylines that you resonate with, and the others you can kind of read quickly and like, what happens next in this part? So
yeah, and perhaps some of the things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or the Twilight series have opened the door a little bit, so people are not, and True Blood, people are not as afraid to go outside their normal genre, you know, and try something out. Here's something that I'm sure several people in this audience imagine and hope for. What was it like the day that you got the call that your book had been sold to Orbit?
It ranks up there, and I'm not sure the order anymore, with my wedding day and the day my son was born. I'm not sure which one. I'm sorry. There was more pain involved with the birth, you know what I mean? So that kind of loses some points, and the wedding day was good. But it's kind of a long story, but I love to tell it because my story of how I sold is the story that they tell you will never happen to you as an aspiring writer. I got an agent. Do you mind if I?
No, go ahead.
No?
These are questions. These are questions I was going to ask you. So go ahead.
Settle in. Okay, so I finished the book in October of 2000 and what year are we in? 2007, and started submitting to agents. Probably about a month later, I got an email from the man who is now my agent, Jonathan Lyon, saying, I read the partial. Sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you. And I was like, it's only been a month. If anybody here submitted, I've had agents take a year to get back to me with a form rejection, right? So I'm like, a month? Really? Okay, you're forgiven. So he said, send me the full. He read it overnight and offered the next day. Which was a very exciting day too. And I had done my homework on him, and knew I wanted to work with him. He's also an attorney, and that was kind of knew that, and that was a big plus in his favor, in my opinion. But he was obviously very enthusiastic about the book, which counts for a lot. You don't want to just take anybody who'll be like, I'll take it on. You want somebody who's like, oh my God, this is amazing, because they need to have that enthusiasm to get through submission. It can be a long haul. So he said, I love it, but I have a couple of suggestions, minor tweaks, no major rewrites. I guess this was early December, so I took a few weeks, made the changes, and I sent him the final, version Christmas Eve. Well, obviously publishing closes down for a couple weeks, and he said, okay, we're going to go on submission the second week of January on Tuesday. For some reason, he always starts submitting on Tuesday, but we had a list of editors he thought would like the book that we had agreed upon, and so he sent it out on that Tuesday. Well, around that time, my husband found out that he was going to Japan for 2 weeks. And we made a joke, like, oh, wouldn't it be so hilarious if you got an offer while I was out of the country? Because, you know, my husband has been an amazing support system for me through all this. And I was like, go figure that would happen. But then I was like, that's not going to happen. He was only going to be gone for 2 weeks. Sure enough. 8 days later, after the book went on submission, I was sitting in a play area with my son, cutting snowflakes out of construction paper, when my cell phone rang. It was about 5 o'clock. And, you know, us writers, we have kind of this tendency to have a lot of magical thinking. And I thought, I had convinced myself, if I don't get a call by noon, it's not happening that day, right? So when the phone rings at 5, I'm like, oh, we got our first rejection. He's breaking it to me gently. So I stand up and answer the phone. He's like, are you sitting down? I'm like, oh, let me sit down for rejection. Totally clueless. So I go over and I squat on this little stool made for like a 3-year-old. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, what? He's like, Orbit has read your book. They want to offer you a 3-book deal. And the number he quoted was a lot higher than I expected. And he said, but, oh, well, here's my reaction. Jump up, scream, oh my God, and burst into tears in front of dozens of children. They're like, Mommy, what's wrong? So my son's like, Mom, what's wrong? And I'm like, so I'm trying to like smile to my son and let him know that nobody has died or something. I'm trying to like deal with my agent. I'm like, I'm gonna have to call you back. So I get to the car. I can't even imagine what I look like running through that place, leaving. I get to the car and I try to call my husband. Well, he's in Japan, which is on the opposite time spectrum. So it was like 3 or 4 in the morning for him. And I guess that night he'd gone out and had some sake with some friends. So he wasn't answering the phone. So I called my mom, of course, and again, burst into tears. Mom, you know. I'm trying to drive, crying, and she's like, please pull over. My grandson's in the car. She's like, but I'm coming to your house. I'm like, okay. So I pull myself together and call my agent back, and he says, all right, listen, this is the first offer. There are still like 5 other editors out there who have to read this book. So now what we do is we call them, and we say, we have an offer, are you interested? He said, prepare yourself, it could go to auction. And I said, really? Because I'm ready to take this. I would pay them. And I'm sure he was not happy about that comment. So he's like, okay, so the next day, that was a Wednesday, the next day on Thursday, he's kind of giving me updates like, so-and-so is interested, and it looks like we're going to go to auction tomorrow. So the next morning on Friday, I go to the airport to pick up my husband from his trip. And I'm sure, and I had talked to him by this point, but I'm sure he was very confused. You know, he's like way over on the other side of the world, and I'm calling him, like crying and like cackling, and I'm sure it didn't seem real to him. So I literally got home from the airport picking him up, and the phone rang, and I was on the phone all day, fielding phone calls from my agent as editors were bidding. It wasn't, I guess, an official auction where they set a starting point and an ending point for bidding. It was just kind of like rolling. It turned out that all the editors who read it, except for one whose list was full, bid.
This is the fairy tale story of publishing. So don't get ideas that all your first novels are going to go to auction. It's good. It does happen. No, I'm not I'm not being a downer. I'm just saying. I'm saying how wonderful it is and how unexpected it is, and that it can happen. And I was giggling to myself at my computer as an editor the day that I'm scrolling through Publishers Weekly and saw Jaye Wells' debut novel, Red-Headed Stepchild, sold for ungodly amount at auction. No, it didn't, but it listed the number of figures.
It listed a range. Anywho, so we're going through the bidding, and at the end of the day, Orbit decided to preempt. And for those who don't know, a preempt is when an editor makes a power play, basically, and they say, this is our best and final offer. You take it now or we're pulling it off the table. It's a way to force the hand and kind of end things. And, you know, I knew, I was already leaning towards them anyway. They were the first to offer. The editor, my editor, Davey Pillay, was extremely excited, which, again, counts for a lot. And Orbit, if you're not familiar with Orbit, they have a very long history in the UK for science fiction and fantasy, and just in the last couple of years opened a division in the US under Hachette, their imprint of Hachette. And so they were actively building their American list of urban fantasy, and they really only had a couple of urban fantasy authors at the time. They had Lilith St. Croix and Jennifer Raridan. And so they were looking for a new urban fantasy voice to bring in. So the timing of it worked very well, and she was very excited. And so it was really a no-brainer for me to go ahead and accept the preempt. So at about 5 o'clock that evening, it was like, okay, that's done. Honey, we have a deal, you know? And so it was champagne and inviting friends over and whatever, but it really did not feel real at all. It was like terrifying and very exciting at the same time. It's like, okay, all my dreams have just come true. What do I do? What's going on? Are they sure? Like, can they change their mind now? Like, what if she sleeps on it over the weekend and calls back? Well, that didn't happen. So that's how we got to a deal. And of course, you know, there are other factors. Even if you don't go to auction, if you have more than one editor interested, it's more than money. It's not just who's going to give you the best advance. It's also because there actually were editors who were ready to keep bidding beyond the preempt, but I was ready to go with Orbit. I knew that they were who I wanted to go with. I had done my homework. But you also have to look at the other deal points. You have to look at, like, some people wanted to buy world language rights, which is a completely different playing field than just buying world English. And so you kind of have to, and then there's, you know, the track record of the house and who else they publish and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, there were a lot of factors involved in making that decision.
Yeah, and Jay brings up some good points about homework, and that's in regards to an agent or a publisher. I would, as she said, you don't, if you are, you know, fortunate enough to receive an offer from an agent or an editor, check them out. I've experienced writers who want to jump on the first person who offers them agency, and have seen writers who have, say, a memoir or narrative nonfiction about to go with an agent who represents children's authors. And, you know, you may be at that point where you think that's something you want to do, but it's not a good idea.
I would actually
amend.
I would amend that and say you should actually do your homework before you even submit to them.
Yes, definitely. Before
Don't
you
just
submit
blast
to
them.
agents.
You need to, when you come up with your list of agents, you come up with that list through homework. You know who is representing the authors who write your genre, the agents who are well respected in the genre. You can do that. Well, first you can do that by going to, like, Author Query or, you know, those sites. Google it. I don't remember it, but and you can search on your genre and list every agent who's listed with them who represents your genre, what they're looking for, and how to submit to them. Take it a step further. Look at the authors that you love to read in your genre, and in the acknowledgement section, it's pretty sure that they're going to thank their agent. Find out who their agent is. You can do the same with editors too, but I would recommend getting an agent. And then once you have a list, that's when the real work begins, because then you have to basically stalk them online. I'm not advocating stalking agents, but Google them. Go to Absolute Right Water Cooler. If you haven't been there, it's a wonderful, wonderful discussion board where lots of writers and people in the industry come on and talk, and you can do a search on specific agents' names and see what experience other writers have had with that agent, good or bad. You can find out how long they took to get back to people. You can find out, like, oh, that was that agent who got really drunk at that conference and said that really horrible thing. I mean, there is a lot of gossip out there, and you kind of have to wade through it. But you want to do your homework before you even submit to them. That way, when you get a phone call, you know who's calling you. You know who they represent. You know you can go on. You can pay to join Publishers Marketplace. It's not that expensive. You can join for a month. I think they may even have a free trial, and it will tell you all the deals that they've reported over the last however many years, and you can find out sometimes the ranges that they're selling for. You can find out what genres they're strong in, what editors they're selling to, because sometimes some agents actually kind of sell again and again and again to the same house, because and you probably want somebody who has really good contacts in a lot of houses. So you really do want to make sure before you even send out a query letter that you know who you're dealing with, and then make sure that when you start querying, I am not an organized person naturally, but I have to like force the structure on myself, or I can't keep track of anything. So I had an Excel spreadsheet where I listed everybody I submitted to, the date, what kind of response I got from them, whether it was a form rejection, a good rejection with notes, whether they went above and beyond, whether they wanted to see my next project, or whether I heard anything at all, if they got my name wrong on the rejection. Like, I kept track of that stuff because I went through a few rounds before I sold my book. So I kind of like knew who I was dealing with by the time I was submitting Red, and I knew, I didn't have such a great experience with that agent. I don't know if I could work with them, or I talked to them at a conference or something. So you kind of whittle it down and kind of get to know things, but keep track of it, do your homework, and then that way when you get the call, because you're going to freak when you get the call from an agent. It's very odd. For some reason, among aspiring writers and just in the community, people almost get more excited about you getting an agent than they do getting a deal. It's a very weird phenomenon, but it's true. You see it. It's like, I don't know, it's funny because agents actually kind of work for you. So they're like, congratulations, you hired somebody, but I mean, you're partners, but you want to be sure that when the call comes, you know what you're dealing with. Sorry.
That's okay, but the agent is the first step, and I think that's why people get excited, and I would recommend, if you're trying to be traditionally published, that you seek an agent, because they have connections, and they have know-how, and they have an open port to their favorite editors or people who they've sold books to before. They have people they can call and say, oh, I have a book that you really like, and I know what you like, and you like this, and Jaye's mentioning conferences and things like that. There's a lot of that. It's like anything else in life, networking can get you a long way. And you hate to say that you can get somewhere by who you know. But not querying. You don't have to know somebody, but I'm saying the agent. It is who the agent knows to some degree. Yeah. It's who the agent knows. And
but I mean that won't sell your project if your project isn't sellable. But it may kind of smooth the way a little bit. And then when you get to negotiations on the contract, you definitely want there to be you want your agent to go to bat for you, not be afraid to argue about things, but you also want them to have a good working relationship with the house that you're sold to.
Yeah. And we're speaking about fiction. There are other ways to get other types of books published, but for fiction, some people say it's changing, and maybe it is. It is changing in some respects. It depends on your goal. If your goal is to be published by, a big traditional New York publisher, then I would say an agent is the way to go. And Jaye has this, like we said, a fairy tale story. So it can happen, and it does happen. And Jaye was just here, in Raleigh a few short years ago, and I'll say, at some point when we were both in Nordstrom with babies and toddlers in tow, I don't know if we imagined this. Yeah. So.
Well, and then in addition to just the going to auction part of it, you have to understand that when I started submitting Red-Headed Stepchild, people were predicting the demise of the vampire. They also said that first-time authors can't sell series. you hear all sorts of advice online, and as I am a huge advocate of blogs, I read blogs, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I am like omnipresent online. But you have to become very good at deciding what sources to listen to, what to just chalk up to gossip and that kind of thing. I had an agent when I was submitting who had requested, she'd read my second book, the full of my second book, and requested to see my next book. And I considered that my Close But No Cigar book, the second one. So I was like, well, when I was ready to send Redheaded Stepchild off, I was like, absolutely, I'll at least get a partial request from this agent. She wouldn't even look at it. She wrote back, when she wrote a note to my query, and she's like, I'm sorry, the market's too flooded for vampires. And when I got that rejection, I was like, it's over. But then I was like, no, it's not. And kept going, and look what happened, so you just have to be, kind of believe in your project and keep going, and sometimes timing is super duper important, and you just have to make sure that you're out there enough that luck can find you, so.
Yeah. Well, to go in a different direction, you mentioned blogs, and I know that you use blogging, and that you are all over the internet, and I had a good time keeping track of you after you went to Texas through your blog, and keeping up with what's going on with you. And what I liked about Jaye's blog is it wasn't just a personal blog. It wasn't even just about Jaye's own writing adventures, though we saw a lot of that. But she offered advice to other writers, and here's a good link, and here's what I found. And so she was able to attract writers or readers as well. So she was able to attract, I'm sure, readers and writers. And so I wanted to say, and the answer may be no, but do you think keeping a blog, a regular blog, helped you?
Not in the way that you're asking. I don't think that having a blog helped me get a contract faster or something. Having a blog helped me figure out my voice as a writer, because you get instant feedback on what you're writing, and you realize. And what was funny for me when I first started my blog, I just had it open to my friends. You can kind of keep it private. And I go back and I read those posts now, and I was trying so hard. I was just trying to be entertaining, and it shows. And then eventually I realized, I can use my blog to meet other writers, and to network is such it's such a businessy term, I hate it. But really, I just wanted to meet other people who like to write and were interested in this, and who were struggling with the same things I was struggling. I started a blog 3 years before I got published. And in that time, I got this amazing circle of friends who were aspiring writers. Some of them have gone on to be very well published. Jamie Ford, who wrote The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, which hit the New York Times bestseller list, his first book was a guy that I hung out with on blogs, and we entered writing contests together for fun and stuff, and now we're good friends, and it was great because I sold 6 months after him, and we were both just so excited for each other. So you create a community. But as far as developing my voice, when I opened it up to more people and started kind of, it wasn't just me showboating for my friends. It was, I can't control who's reading my blog anymore, so I just have to kind of be myself. That's when I figured out my voice, and I realized I'd done it when a girlfriend who has known me since I was 18 said, I'm really enjoying your blog now because it sounds like you. It's like having a conversation with you. And that's when I knew that I kind of tapped into that authentic voice that, for whatever it's worth. But it was very important. But the other piece of that was the community. Redheaded Stepchild started as a flash fiction piece that I submitted to a friend's blog contest. And the people, and it's a wonderful community. Everybody reads everybody else's stories, and everybody votes on the reader favorites and that kind of thing. And I got such amazing feedback on it. People who said, I don't read vampires, but I reread a novel with this protagonist. And I was like, ding, 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 that's my next project.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I remember when you said, I've got a story up at this blog, go read it. And I thought, I'll read it, I don't know. I love Jaye. But but I wasn't sure I loved her writing. I'm a book snob, and I love literary fiction, and I've got all these high-minded ideas about books and fiction, and I read that story. I remember that story, and I was like, oh, this is good. I want to read this. So
Yeah, and it became the first chapter of the book. It changed some because her motivations changed. But I mean, if you read the first chapter of the book, that started as a 250-word, very short story on a blog. And you never know when the connections that you make, and you can't be opportunistic about it. It's really got to be about making genuine connections with people. And I would recommend that if you're thinking about starting a blog, that you go into it with that perspective, not what can I do to help my writing career? What writers can I meet online who can introduce me to their agent? Because believe me, we can smell that a mile away, you guys. I'm not that far into my career that I don't remember the desperation, but the desperation does come through when you're trying to connect with somebody simply because you think they can do something for you. It really has got to be about, you're an interesting person. I want to get to know who you are. That's what it's about. And the more that marketing is going online and the more we're using things like Twitter and Facebook and blogs, that's becoming more and more important, is trying to make a genuine connection through a computer, basically. So.
yeah. And going kind of back to my question, it probably didn't help you get published, but talking about an authentic voice, I guarantee you Jonathan Lyons looked at your blog
Probably.
before he made an offer to get an idea about who Jaye was, what kind of writing Jaye does, what kind of connections she has with other people, not because those would be beneficial to him or to the book, but it does kind of tell you.
Well, just like I Googled him and read his blog.
That's exactly right.
And when I got my deal and I talked to the publicity coordinator at Orbit, he said, we're thrilled you have a blog. We're thrilled you're on Facebook. Not because, I have this huge audience. I didn't have a huge audience. I maybe at that point had 75 regular readers a day. But since some of those were repeat visitors, like my husband, you know what I mean? But they were loyal. They came every day, and I went to their blogs every day. But the reason it was important that I already had that stuff in place is you're freaking out. You're dealing with contracts, you're dealing with deadlines, you're dealing with copy edits, and if you have to add coming up to speed on technology and social networking, and in addition to that, you're going to feel very overwhelmed. So. But I would say a caveat. If it's not something that you're interested in and it's not something that you necessarily think you'd be very good at, don't force it. Because it's a waste of your time.
That's true.
You're far better off writing. You're
Yeah.
far better off putting your time into writing.
Yeah, if you set up a blog and it has your name on it and all this stuff, and you update it once every 2 months with what bird you saw at your kitchen window this morning.
Well, and the other thing...
And you can do, if you want a personal blog to say what bird you saw at your kitchen window, then great, but...
Do not talk about your rejections on your blog. Do not badmouth agents on your blog. Do not do anything that an agent can go back and read it and be like, oh, yeah, they have a really bad attitude. Because you know what? You're asking them to develop a working professional relationship, and you want them to know that if you two, when you're working together, have some kind of an issue, you're not going to go blog about it. You know what I mean? Just like your husband doesn't want you to blog about, the fact he left his underwear on the floor and you guys had a huge fight about it that morning. Unless it's really funny, then you can totally blog about it. My poor husband. But really, the purpose of a blog is there's a lot of purposes, and you have to figure out what your goal is, I guess. You know what I mean? There are some people who do have wonderful review blogs, and that's how they get known. Or, there's just a lot of different ways to approach it. But work with your strengths, and if you don't think it's a strength, then go write a book.
Yeah, if this was...
Blog writing does not count as writing for your day. It doesn't. I used to do that. I'd be like, well, I haven't written on my chapter, but I blogged. No, it's not the same.
Yeah, like you said, if you never in a million years would do a blog, but because you heard us talk about blogging tonight, you're going to go set up a blog. Don't do it. Be true to yourself.
But the
would
other
say-
way too, I mean, if you read blogs, you can still make connections by commenting on other people's blogs and joining the conversation without having your own blog. And I would recommend that. If you read a blog that's very interesting, there's a ton of amazing agent blogs, editor blogs, people who just really, really love books and love to talk about them. Tons of authors. Go to your favorite author's website and see if they have a blog and join the conversation. And kind of, you are making connections that way. I got most of my readers by commenting on other people's blogs. And you're like, who's that chick? Some of you probably have heard of Miss Snark, her fantastic blog. And sadly it's dead now, but still up if the resources are still there. But she was an anonymous agent who gave fantastic advice. And everybody read her blog. And I entered some silly contest on her blog. She gave you like a few words that you had to use in it, and it had to do with Jack Reacher and I don't remember the exact one, but I entered a silly story into that, and I was the only idiot who put my name on it. Everybody else was anonymous. I'm like, da-da-da, by Jaye Wells. I killed an agent in that story. Dan Lazar, I think it was, that died in that story with Ryder's House. No hard feelings, Dan. But it was just a funny thing, and so this guy read that and thought it was funny and came and started reading my blog, and then I started reading his blog, and now we critique for each other. His name's Sean Farrell, and his first book, he just got his first contract, and his first book's coming out next year from HarperCollins, and it's called Numb. I have to plug it. But we found each other through this very odd set of circumstances, and now I consider him one of my best writing friends. He lives up in New York. I just met him face to face a month ago, but I consider him a really, really good friend. But it's because of a blog that we found each other. So it can be really wonderful, a really wonderful experience if you want to do it.
We're running a little tight on time.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
I
okay.
totally
This is
babble.
No, this is all good. So I'd like you to read a little bit of Redheaded Stepchild for us, and then I'll see if anybody has questions.
Okay. So I normally read my first chapter, but it's kind of long, and since we have the interview tonight, I figure I'd do something a little shorter. This is from chapter 4. And the only thing you need to know about this scene is that Sabina gets an unwanted visitor, or an unexpected visitor, and unwanted, as it goes. And the other thing you really need to know about the world at this point is that in the mythology I've set up for Redheaded Stepchild, vampires are descended from Lilith, which started way back in the Garden of Eden. And there's a connection with the Garden of Eden and the fact that vampires are weakened by apples because of the forbidden fruit aspect. And my conceit there is that Adam and Eve ate the apple and became mortal. Lilith did not eat the apple, so she's immortal. So I took the leap and said, the minute you get apple in your system, you're mortal. So the weapons that we use to kill vampires in this book are applewood stakes, it has to be applewood, or bullets filled with apple pulp or something like that, mace filled with cider, it's kind of funny, but it made sense to me in my warped mind. So anyway, so the way you kill a vampire is you introduce apples. It's not a huge part, but it'll make sense in a minute. As I closed the fridge door, the air suddenly crackled with electricity. Through the breakfast bar, I saw a flash of green light and a puff of smoke. I grabbed my gun from the kitchen counter and ran into the room with my heart palpitating. When I saw what waited for me, the bottle crashed to the floor. Broken glass and cold beer coated my stinging shins. The demon stared down at me with a fierce scowl. His eyes had horizontal pupils and black horns jutted from his temples. 2 wicked-looking black claws rested on scaly green hips. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed frozen stones. My mind screamed for me to move, but the message got lost in translation on the way to my limbs. Sabina Kane. His voice had this odd echo effect, as if it came from another dimension. A reptilian smile hovered on his black lips. This wasn't a social call. I crouched low, ready for battle. I'd never fought a demon, but damned if I was going to stand there like some B-movie actress waiting for him to kill me. Get out. I pointed the gun at his chest. I'm afraid I can't do that, he said. At least I thought it was a he. The black leather codpiece kind of hinted in that direction. A wooden stake appeared in his claw, the tip whittled down to a single spear-like point. That didn't bode well. Who sent you? I slowly stepped to the right, trying to find a way to the exit. The demon's eyes tracked me. He didn't answer, just moved a couple of steps forward. I held my ground, but tightened my grip on the gun. I didn't know if the apple bullets worked on demons, but they might slow it down. I glanced at the stake. The demon would have to get close range to use it. I had the gun. I pulled back the slide and squeezed the trigger twice. The bullets ripped through the demon's chest. He blinked and looked down at the 2 rapidly healing holes. That wasn't very nice. The stake disappeared, and a crossbow took its place. Panic froze me to the floor. My brain screamed to move, move, move. Instead, I watched the demon lift the crossbow as if in slow motion. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The arrow flew through the air so fast I barely saw it before it slammed into my chest. I flew back as the arrow went through my body and speared me to the wall. I registered the impact on some level, but my mind was too busy dealing with the fact I was about to die. Any second, my body would burst into flames and I'd be gone. Poof, nothing left but a pile of ash. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks as I closed my eyes and waited. There was no pain, just shock and a dull sense of inevitability. Why haven't you exploded yet? The demon was closer now, only a few feet away. I opened one eye to look at the arrow. Blood bloomed from the site of impact, just over my left breast. I don't know. Holding myself up became difficult as the seconds passed. I wonder if I should stake you just to be sure. I'd really prefer it if you didn't, I said. I'm sure I'll ignite any second. I focused on the pain, which had just started to register. Sorry, this scene cracks me up. It didn't feel like I was about to combust, though. It felt more like a freaking arrow had ripped through my heart. Not the best feeling in the world, but I imagine it had to pale in comparison to having my immortal soul sucked from my body in a fiery death. The demon came forward without warning and jerked the arrow from my body. The damn thing had lodged itself so deep it took a couple of good pulls to get it loose. I grunted against the pain, and cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The tip of the arrow finally came free with a disgusting sucking noise. I collapsed to the floor and curled up in the fetal position in a puddle of spilled beer. From the corner of my eye, I saw the demon hold the arrow up to the light. He lifted the tip to his mouth, and his forked tongue darted out to taste the blood. My blood. I groaned and squeezed my eyes shut. At that point, I'd almost hoped he staked me. No words exist to describe the pain. Well, I guess that's that. The demon's hooves click-clacked against the hardwoods. I felt him hovering close. You okay? My eyes snapped open. Already my heightened healing powers were making quick work of the wounds. Am I okay? I barked. You just shot me through the heart with an arrow.
Oh, you sounded like you had a note of recognition.
I levered myself into a sitting position against the wall. The pain was fading, but I felt drained. I'd need blood soon to make up for what I'd lost. Here's a tip, I said. Next time you want to kill a vampire, you might want to try applewood. The demon frowned. Hello, what do you take me for, an idiot? It was applewood. What little blood I had left in my head drained out. You're wrong. If that was applewood, why am I still alive? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That was Gagool, and he plays a really big role in the story, and he's my favorite character, so I'm reading his scenes.
Yeah, he sticks around for a little while. Does anybody have questions for Jaye?
She's read the first 2 books.
Not
in a lot of sense.
There's a reason they have
work, and are they prequels to this book, or were they same genre?
No, actually, the first 2 books I wrote were paranormal romances, actually set in Raleigh. I got the idea for my first book when I worked at the North Carolina Museum of Art, and I was walking through the galleries one day, and there's this painting, I don't remember the name of it, but it's a portrait of a very dashing man in a uniform with a red jacket, and he's very handsome. And it just occurred to me, like, what if a woman fell in love with the idea of a man in the painting? And what if he came back? I couldn't figure out how he was going to come back. I was like, maybe she'll go into the painting. Like, I knew that there had to be some kind of weird element to it. But I stewed on that idea for a long time. And then, in between, I moved back to Texas, and I actually didn't think about it again until I took I was turning 30, and I decided, oh my God, I'm running out of time. And I decided to take a class at a local community college on writing romance. I wasn't sure that romance was ultimately what I wanted to write, but I enjoyed reading it, and I thought it was a good place to start. And she said, the teacher said, if you want to know what to write, go home and look at your bookshelves. What you like to read is probably what you enjoy writing. And at the time, I thought I'd go home and decide, I need to write historical fiction. I'm a huge nerd. I love research, and I thought for sure it would be that. But I also knew that there would be an enormous challenge trying to learn how to write fiction while also dealing with the rigors of research. And so I kind of knew I didn't want to start that way. It felt like too much to bite off at the beginning. So I kept looking, and I realized I had every vampire book ever written by Anne Rice, and I had Katie McAllister and Lindsay Sands and Sherilyn Kenyon and all the big names, and it had never even occurred to me that I had a vampire thing. But then I started thinking about this story, and I was like, wait a second, he could totally come back if he was a vampire. And so that's how I started my first book. The main character is a curator at the North Carolina Museum of Art. It's called something else, but that's basically what it is. And a guy shows up one day claiming that they have a painting that belongs to his family. Oh, and the reason I look exactly like the guy in the painting is I'm his, descendant. I'm not saying it was the best book ever written. And that was a fun one to write. I wrote it in third person, and was the only book I've written in third person. And went through rounds of submissions, and got lots of form rejections, but got some requests. Then I kept going, and I actually had anticipated that being a series, and so the second book takes the bad guy, the bad girl, the villainess from the first book, and it's her story. And I love that story because it was really different for romance, because it was two vampires. It was a romance between two vampires. And I took this kind of like villain chick and gave her a love story. And it was the first time I wrote first person, and I knew immediately it clicked, this is what I prefer to write in. That book got a lot more requests, and that's when keeping track in the Excel spreadsheet comes in handy, because you can kind of gauge your improvement as you go. And I don't know, I think the second book has a better chance of eventually getting published, but I don't know if it'll happen. But I do love the stories. And I think one of the keys to going from that book to this book and getting sold is that I switched genres. Urban fantasy opened up the opportunities for me in fiction. I love reading romance, but I felt very constrained by the expectations of the genre, of the happily ever after and that kind of thing. And plus, I knew from the short story that I wrote about Sabina that she was not a romance type of girl. And I had been reading urban fantasy, and I said, well, maybe I'll try an urban fantasy. And I loved it because it breaks open the possibilities in a story, because it's almost like a heroine's journey, and I love the idea that it's not just focusing on her finding love, it's finding out who she is, and it's very exciting for me. And I think that making that switch helped me tap into the really good things about my writing, my strengths as a writer. And so if I had to guess what changed, that had to be it. So I don't know if this will ever get published. We'll see.
Yeah, right.
The first one probably shouldn't. The second one will see.
Anyone else?
At what point in the submission process did you decide to move on from book 1 to book 2 and then book 3? How many rejections do you have to get before you're ready to?
That's a good question. I kind of did it by feel, but it ended up being probably about 15 for some reason. And I don't know if that's because I had a list of 15 agents and they all rejected me, and I was like, well, okay. But you do find that, especially in genre, that certain agents rep certain genres, and so it's not like there's 2,000 agents who represent paranormal romance with vampires. I mean, it's a smaller subset of the agent pool. And there were some that I didn't want to submit to, and then, so I just kind of went by feel, and eventually I had to just kind of admit to myself, it's not ready. With the second book, like I said, I mean, I got a lot of full requests for that book, and I kept getting these great rejections, and eventually I just said, you know what, this is not the book. This is my Close But No Cigar book. So I'm going to regroup and write something else, and maybe that will be the cigar book, and it was, so.
And it just occurred to me, some of you may not even know what Jay's talking about when she says a full request. When you query an agent, if you haven't done that already, you send part of your book.
Nope.
Well,
You send a query letter. You send a query letter first. You don't send.
well, that's true. That's true. Sorry.
And these
If
days
they
it's
ask
great
to
because
see
most
it,
agents take them through email. So you send them a business email. Don't just be like, I got this book, and some stuff happens. Like, it's a business letter. And then if they're intrigued, and it's basically your pitch. It's
right.
this is the hook of my book. Sorry, I
No, that's good. And then, if they're interested, then you send a part of your book. You don't send the whole book. But
They'll tell you what they want to see.
Yeah. And what I was going to say with that, too, if some of you may not know, if you are writing fiction, go ahead and write the whole book before you start querying agents.
Yeah.
Don't tell them I have this great idea and I've got the first chapter and it's going to be great. Because no one's going to take you seriously and they're not going to see it. But you have to show that you can finish it. Now, nonfiction is a whole different ball of wax. And depending on what you're writing, you may be able to get away with even just sending a book proposal and an outline and finding an agent that way. But since we're...
Well, and I might, just to add on to that real quick, if you're just starting out and you haven't finished a story yet, don't even think about agents and all that stuff. You gotta finish something first. If you can't finish a book, don't even think about that stuff, because it's kind of a requirement if you want to get published. You got to finish it. And if you aren't passionate enough about it or interested enough to stick with it and finish it, there's nothing wrong with that. But you probably won't be published, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Plenty of people get a lot of joy out of writing for a hobby or just for passion. But finish something and then start focusing on the business stuff.
Right. Did you have
When
a
you say
question?
finish, you also say the whole book. How many rewrites do you go through, before you think you're finished?
It depends on the book. Every book, I think it was Neil Gaiman who said, with each book you have to learn how to write that book. So each is different. Generally for me, I write a pretty clean first draft, because I'm one of those, it I can't just, vomit it out and then go fix it. Like it has to kind of be on track as I go through. Because I don't like throwing stuff out and starting over. That's me. So I get through a pretty good first draft. I'll send it to a critique partner and kind of get their feedback, and I'll think about it, and then I'll go through probably at least one, sometimes 2 rounds of revision. And then I also go through at least 1 round of copy edits, line editing, and I'm going to add one more. I also go through, there's a pass I do that's just about making the writing awesome. Okay, and that is using mnemonic devices and taking out the passive voice and that kind of stuff. So my revisions are fixing the story, and that pass I was just referring to is fixing the words, making the word magic. And then I do another round that's just copy editing, fixing typos and that kind of thing. So it's very clean all the time. But I used to be a magazine editor, so that stuff doesn't bother me. I like the different steps of it, but you have to check the edit before you submit too.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're not great at that, maybe have someone else do it.
You need to learn, look, I'm sorry, I'm gonna rant for a second. I hear people say, well, I've never been good at things like commas and grammar. If you want to be a writer, you need to know the tools that writers use. If you can't write a sentence that clearly expresses an idea, focus on that before you worry about getting a six-figure publishing contract. Okay? People fall too in love with the idea of the mystique of being an author that they don't want to do the work of being an author. Okay? And it is work. It's fun, it's creative, it's the best job I've ever had. But I love debating things like where should the comma go. I'm a nerd about that stuff. You don't have to be a nerd about it, but know the rules. Because then you can know those rules and break them and develop your own style. I start sentences with conjunctions all the time, and it drives people like Robin crazy.
No,
But it's a style for
You know
me.
what?
It's a rhythm to the way I write. It's part of my voice.
I will say,
I know it's wrong.
it does not drive me crazy if I can tell you know the rules, but you're purposefully breaking it.
Right.
And you can tell. You can tell the difference between someone who doesn't know they're not supposed to do that and someone who is doing that as a part of the style. I'm editing a book right now, and it's not fiction, but the author has done a lot of that, starting sentences with conjunctions and all these things that your English teacher told you was wrong. But I know that he knows what he's doing.
It's obviously a
It's
stylistic
obviously a
choice.
stylistic choice. Now, you can't not know what you're doing and call it a stylistic choice because the editor is going to know the difference.
Oh, and on stuff like spelling, I'm not the best speller ever, and of course we have spell check, but you still need to go back and double check your spell check. Or you'll get words like, instead of public library, you'll get pubic library or something. You've got to check that stuff, okay? Just please.
Please, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, would you be able to pull a sentence or a couple of sentences out that you might recall that weren't awesome, that you made awesome?
I can tell you exactly a sentence, and I'll read it to you in a second, but I got to give you background on it. I took an amazing full-day workshop by a woman named Margie Lawson. Write it down. Margie Lawson is a therapist, and she's a writer. And she gives amazing workshops on how to instill emotion into your writing. It's her business to know how to elicit emotion from people. And she has gone through hundreds, I think, probably, of best-selling authors looking for the techniques that they use to elicit emotion from readers. Because if you think about it, what you're doing as an author is you're taking a reader on an emotional journey. And you've all read books where, when the action's really going, your heart's beating fast too, and you're like, oh my God, or when you cry, or you're being manipulated by the masters, okay? So Margie teaches you how to do that. And one of the techniques that she teaches is to go through with a highlighter, and I don't want to tell you her whole secret because you need to take her class, but you highlight different elements of story, narration, description, what's the word I'm looking for? Visceral emotion, so like your heart's beating fast, sweat breaks out on your brow, the emotional stimuli that you can't control that are reaction to emotion. And so she teaches you how to do it. So I took this class, and she said, go through the chapter that you brought and find a sentence that's okay, and then make it better, take it far. And she using the technique she taught that day. So I wrote this sentence. I don't remember what it originally said. I can probably guess if I find it. Hold on. Dead silence. Where is it?
Well, let me let
Talk
you.
while I look.
Yeah, you find that you were waiting. Does anybody have maybe an editorial related question or a publishing question that I can answer for
A
you?
writing question.
Okay.
My question is, as you're writing, Do your characters pretty much do what you had planned, or do they surprise you and go off like the left field?
It's not like that for me. I know it is for some writers. For me, I see it's a movie in my head, and I'm watching the story unfold. I kind of know where I want it to go and kind of set the scene almost. It's not that characters surprise me, it's that, I don't, it's not,